Hey everybody, you are listening to Canary Cry Radio. And razzle dazzle, I'm your best buddy Basil.
And my name is Gons. Welcome to episode number 164.
164. There's got to be something there. That's 2 times 82. So
That's
think
true.
about that.
Yeah. Parallel 82s, parallel dimensions, parallel
Whoa.
troubles.
Oh my goodness, it's all coming together.
Yeah. Belfast meets Basil on this episode.
Yeah. You know, I gave a little tease about this a couple weeks ago on the Canary Cry News Talk podcast. So hopefully you caught that. But if you didn't, go check out Canary Cry News Talk. But this was an experience. Gons, as we move into the future as podcasters, we've come so far. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we've discussed different ways to sort of, I don't know, do our best to create valuable stuff for a long time. And we've tried a lot of different things. But one thing that has always brought a special value to this show is the sort of boots on the ground reports, the experiences, the journeys that we take to explore the nooks and crannies of what's going on in the world, or what's going on in the multiverse, or what's going on in the human heart. And this is one of those episodes, and I hope everybody enjoys it, of course. Now, in recent days, recent times, we have seen a significant flare-up in the Middle East, which has, you know, tried to which has resulted in millions upon millions of people becoming instant experts overnight about Middle East geopolitics.
You got a lot of end times Bible prophecy experts poking their head out too. So this is their time as well.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see even the mainstream cable media doing reports on the sort of end times connections with the war in the Middle East. It was very bizarre. That was a part of the news cycle a couple weeks ago. But there was something that clicked, some small thing that clicked in my head when this, you know, conversation became the most important thing. And of course, what clicked in my head was not the mass appeal regurgitation of your classic Israel-Palestine analysis. No, in the deep, dark recesses of the Basil brain was a twinkle, and that twinkle was Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland. For those Americans listening out there, Northern Ireland is different from Ireland. They're two different places.
No, Northern Ireland is like, the West Coast or the East Coast. You know, it's just it's the north part of the Ireland.
The Northern Ireland is not just a cardinal direction on the island of Ireland. No, it is indeed its own entity. Look, Americans, you gotta laugh, okay? You gotta read a book once in a while. I'm only saying this because I had to read a book once, and that's when I learned that Northern Ireland is different from Ireland, and it's a long, storied history of Northern Ireland and the separation between the two. And when you start to learn the history, when you start to learn what really happened up there, some dots start to connect, Gons.
Yeah. Well, when we look around today, a fallen humanity is proven everywhere with the myriad of ways in which we find ourselves in the midst of conflict. Whether it be an argument between you and your spouse or authoritarian regimes pulling off genocide over geography, conflict is inevitable. The conflict in Belfast, Northern Ireland, commonly referred to as the Troubles, was a complex and violent period spanning from the late 1960s to 1998, or at least that's what's in the history books. It involved political, cultural, and sectarian strife primarily between unionists. These were mainly Protestant who wanted Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom, and nationalists, also sometimes referred to as Republicans, mainly Catholic, who desired a united Ireland. This conflict was marked by intense urban guerrilla warfare, bombings, and civil unrest, including the most symbolic monument of division, a wall. A big, giant wall.
Big, beautiful wall.
Big, beautiful wall. And like you said earlier, Basil, it's your nomadic nature that allows us to have these interesting boots on the ground reports, and the show would not be the same without that. So, of course, your best buddy Basil missed a week of Canary Cry News Talk recently, but it was not because he's just on a vacay, right? He's doing work.
How vain.
He's doing work, and he was recently in Belfast, Northern Ireland. He visited the peace wall that separates the Protestants and the Catholics still to this day. And so, yes, I'm reintroducing you, Basil. Your best buddy, Basil.
It is I.
Yes.
Here I am. 2 introductions in 1 episode. Worth it. It is true, Gons. Here's the thing. I already said this to the Canary Cry News Talk audience, but I'll say it here. It was not my intention to miss a week of shows of our 3 times a week Canary Cry News Talk show. Check it out, canarycrynewstalk.com. But time zones, they're a thing, man. And it's already hard enough for you and I to coordinate our schedules. You with the babies, me without babies, but animals. Big, beautiful birds. Yeah. And so it was difficult. We did not do a very good job, but I think it's very important. And I think that there is a critical, at the very least, a critical history lesson about Ireland and Northern Ireland that reflects and may give us insight into the Israel-Palestinian conflict. I will disclaim for both of us, Gons, with the Israel situation, there are temptations around every corner to feel or claim like you have some truth that somebody else doesn't have. And if only they would see what you see or knew what you knew, that they would change their minds about the entire conflict. And that's not what we're doing here. But I think through examining the parallel timelines of the Northern Ireland and Irish conflict and the Israel-Palestinian conflict, it's going to provide some insight that is extremely important. And I'm not the first person to notice some interesting parallels between the 2 stories, but after reading dozens of articles where authors so cleverly compare the Northern Irish and the Palestinian conflicts, it became so clear to me that they, are pretty much just as partisan as any of the conflicts around the world.
Yeah.
And 2-1, every single one, I think, came to a conclusion that was A, predictable, and B, kind of ignored some of the intricate details. Of course, each one of them laying Israel at the altar of blame. And we are not here to defend Israel. We are not here to defend Palestine. We're not here to take sides whatsoever. But no matter what you think about it, I think it is essential that you listen to this episode and understand that history, in the words of Joe Biden, when he,
hey.
in the words of Joe Biden, in his first trip, his very first trip to the Middle East as president of the United States.
Oh, yeah. During wartime, right?
Well, no, his first one was 2022.
Oh, okay.
I believe July 15th, 2022.
His recent visit was made him the first American president to visit during war period, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. But he took one more trip before that, and in his sort of endless desire to seem deep, profound, wise, but also patronly and uncle-like, good old Uncle Joe.
This is not about freedom or personal choice.
That's right. He, too, made, the so broadest comparison to the Irish struggle and the Palestinian struggle. Gave no details. In fact, it confused the cable media very much. But he did conjure up that old saying that history rhymes. He said exactly, hope and history rhyme. It is my prayer that we're reaching one of those moments where hope and history rhyme.
Think minority.
Thanks, Uncle Joe.
Wait, that doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. But
keep yapping, man.
That's our president.
I think his message was,
get vaccinated.
So the more and more I looked into this, the more it became apparent that we had to give it the old Canary Cry treatment. I took a trip to Northern Ireland. Interestingly enough, the Palestinian-Israel conflict started, I don't know, a couple days before. I don't remember exactly the dates.
If I recall, the 7th when it broke out was the day you were supposed to get on an airplane and go there, but you missed the flight or you canceled the flight.
Yes, it was I went the next day. The conflict started, and on the next day I hopped on a plane to go to Northern Ireland. I mean, we're like faster than American police dispatchers over here. We're making it happen. And yes, there was a global travel warning from the president that if you're American and you're traveling, you're just going to die. So you're just going to die. Don't even think about it.
Hunt you down and make you pay.
Don't pass go. If you get on a plane and you're American, you're going to die. I did not die. I'm very grateful for that. But there was sort of a strange, uneasy feeling in the air travel industry that day, of course. But I made it there and just went right to it. In this episode, you will hear a walkabout and an analysis of the Peace Wall in Belfast. This was a wall that was erected straight through the city, specifically during the time of the Troubles, to separate warring factions of what they call Catholics and Protestants. There's a Protestant side, there's a Catholic side, and the wall still stands, even though technically on paper the conflict has ended. And not only does the wall still stand, but periodically they build it higher and higher, and they close the gates at night between. Belfast very much is a place that has never stopped being in conflict. And this peace wall, it is not, as I was just explaining to you, Gons, It is not in some sort of beautiful, grassy, state-sponsored, monument
Paid
that you
parking
can visit.
lot.
Right. There's not a paid parking lot or a public restroom or a queue, a line to get in so you can go see this monument of conflicts past. No, this wall cuts straight through the city. It is a daily part of life for those in Belfast and stands not only as a reminder of the past, but there is a very deep emotional connection for a lot of people who live there today, who consider this wall to still be the thing that is keeping the peace in the city.
Yeah.
And you can't miss it. It is, people have their homes built right up to the side of the wall. As you'll hear, there are roads. People are going about their life with cars driving by. I think at one point I almost got hit by a trash truck or something. I mean, it is just a daily part of life, which is something that, Americans, with our own interesting relationship to walls. I mean, we have the topic of the southern border wall in America is, of course, heated, but also very passion-inducing topic. But that wall does not run straight through LA or straight through New York City. That is a wall down in the distant desert, oftentimes along a river where nobody can see it. We just see it in pictures. We hear it in politicians' speeches. We argue about it, even though almost none of us have seen it in real person. But the peace wall in Belfast is a daily part of life. And so I want to start, Gons. There's a lot. We have a couple different chapters of this episode, but in order to get the most out of what you're about to hear, folks, I think it's important to get a little history lesson. And so what I'm going to attempt to do is give you a breakdown of the parallel historical timelines, both of the Irish and Northern Irish conflict and the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. I'm going to try to do my best here. I want to also disclaim that history is so much more complicated than anybody really wants it to be, including me. There are historical moments and events that I'm just unable to include in this timeline, but I had to pick out what I think are some of the more dramatic moments throughout history that illustrate just the uncanny similarities between these two conflicts. So I'll get into that history, but first I just want to lay down some ideas here. We've mentioned here that the conflict in Ireland is sort of colloquially explained in religious terms. They call it the Protestants versus the Catholics. The Catholics being what somebody could describe as like the native Irish. Of course, the native Irish, they weren't Catholics, they were Celtics or Celts, and they had their own language. They didn't speak English, the whole thing. But at this period in time, the conflict was between Catholics, who were influenced by Rome, and Protestants, who were influenced, of course, by the UK. The UK being sort of the strongest force for Protestantism in history, via their disconnection from the Vatican and the beginning of the sort of English Protestant
the Crown
Church. Yes, the Anglo. What was it called? The
Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah, the Anglo-Saxons, but they had their own sort of Anglo-Christian official religion that was started by the Crown. That
was very apparent this year during the inauguration of King Charles. All the Anglicans. The overt religious ritual in Protestantism was what stood out to me watching the footage of Yeah, King Charles doing it with the big sword and everything, and it's all
Yeah.
based on biblical stuff. Very interesting.
Yeah, and for the Americans out there, when we say Protestant, we just kind of think like,
American evangelical.
yeah, evangelical. That's right. There needs for Americans to really understand this key point. Protestant does not mean evangelical. Americans are to evangelicals as the UK is to Anglican Protestant. Just a little detail there for you religious scholars out there. So you've got the Protestants versus the Catholics in the Northern Ireland dispute. And of course, in the Middle East here, it is constantly referred into in religious terms. You've got the Jews and you've got the Muslims. Interestingly enough, they also say the Jews and the Palestinians. If you're talking about in political terms, it's more of Israeli versus Palestinians. And this is going to be a key distinction in understanding everything here. The way we talk about these conflicts is the way that our worldview is constructed. Because you can call it Judaism versus Islam, or you can call it Protestant versus Catholic. But these conflicts are not inherently religious. Now, of course, we hear the Islamic leadership talking about, the differences between them and the Jews and why who's this heathen and they're, this religious flavor that's sprinkled over everything does exist, but it exists because of the political issues here. So you've got...
It's used like a weapon.
Exactly. Religious names for political ideologies. And, I think it's interesting in the I'll get into that later. So, and I think it's very interesting. Who decided to name these conflicts after their religious factions? I think maybe we'll get some hints along the way, but you've got Protestants versus Catholics, you've got Jews versus Muslims. In the US, we have our own religiously identified political lines. Of course, Republican is basically synonymous with Christian, and Democrat is basically synonymous with, I don't know, other or something. You could say atheist, but I think other is a better description. But of course, as we know, if we really think about it, we really look at it with an objective lens, Republican is not synonymous with Christian. There are millions of Republicans who are atheist or other, and there are millions of Democrats who are Christians. And so you can see how it can be a very easy way to identify political factions, but that distinction in religious terms is not inherent. That is not objective distinctions. So not only in America, between Christian and other does not determine your politics. In some ways, your politics determine how people see your religiosity. In the same way, in the Northern Irish conflict, Catholic and Protestant does not necessarily distinguish between the people as specifically as I was going to say Republican. That might get confusing for Americans, but nationalists and separatists might be the best way to say it. In the same way, Jew versus Muslim does not fully describe what's going on in the Middle East. Moving on. In 1916, Gons, where were you in 1916?
I was on a river, fishing.
Oh.
trying to get some dinner going for the fam.
Fishing on a river.
Yeah.
Wow. I do give you some guff for being old, but I didn't know you're that old.
Well, Asians look young, so.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, 1916 and 1917. I want to bring up these years for just a moment. 1917 might sound familiar to some people out there who are educated about the state of Israel. 1917 was the year that Arthur James Balfour wrote the Balfour Declaration and sent it to Baron Rothschild. The second Baron Rothschild, and that declaration from the British government to a Jewish politician, also, of course, in the lineage, the great lineage of Rothschild banking empire. And the Balfour Declaration read like this: Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or I don't know why I rolled that R, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So from the beginning, rights and political status, from the very seeds of the modern Zionist movement, has been at the core of at least official documentation. It finishes with, I should be grateful if you will bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour.
Balfour, huh? Balfour.
Balfour.
And there's no relationship to Belfast, but, other than the letter B.
Yeah, good distinction. Now, at the same time, in that same period, World War I was just wrapping up. You got to remember, it's the early 20th century, the early 1900s. The world had just experienced the most radical manifestation of war the earth had ever seen. In the Battle of Somme, 3 million men in one battle. 3 million men in one single battle. It truly was an entirely different world back then, where fighting wars was not done by dudes playing video games in the Nevada desert while drones bomb weddings in the Middle East. It was 3 million individuals fighting in one battle. But what came of this was something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It might be pronounced Sykes-Picot, Sykes-Picot. I do not know. I did not look it up, so I apologize to anybody who has read it differently. But I'll call it the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And the Sykes-Picot Agreement was an agreement between France and Britain. And the long and short of it is, this was the official document that gave Britain control of Palestine, modern-day Israel. It all came from a handshake with the French. So, France, you thought you were going to get out of this episode unscathed, and I'm here to tell you, I see your role in all of this, France. France is one of the weird countries in the world that we don't have a whole lot of listeners. And good riddance.
They got a lot of symbolism going on in France, too, with some of their architecture. I remember doing some breakdowns of some of that in the past. So,
the Arc de Triomphe. Now, this is an interesting part that a lot of people miss. The common wisdom about the modern nation state of Israel was that it was established in 1948, and it was established to give Jews a home after World War II because, again, the common knowledge is that nobody would take them. The U.S. didn't want The Jews, Europe didn't want the Jews. Nobody was volunteering to let mass immigration of Jews into their country. And of course, this is described as being anti-Semitic. This was racist.
Mhm.
This was because white people hated Jews, so they had to get their own country. But as we know, Britain had committed to creating, more or less, the state of Israel in 1917, 30 years before the actual establishment. So it did not take till after 1948 to become a place where Jews were sort of recovering from the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, where they had been spread all throughout the world, throughout history. It was in 1917
I was
that kicked off.
I was told Israel was built in a day, Basil.
Yeah, right.
I've seen people quote some scripture on that too, but yeah, just ignore the prior 30 years of activity to lead to that point.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Exactly. Even people who, look into this for an afternoon, they'll say, okay, that's kind of weird that Britain committed to creating Israel 30 years before it actually happened. And hey, it just took them 30 years. The war helped, blah, 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 blah. And while all that's true, almost immediately after the Balfour Declaration was sent to Baron Rothschild, a migration of Jews from mostly Eastern Europe to what we now call Israel started. There was a migration of 40,000 Jews from Europe that made their way into the Palestinian region. So it was not overnight in 1948 that suddenly Jews came out of nowhere and appeared in Palestine. There was, even starting in 1917, it only took about 3 years or so for 40,000 Jews from Europe to move to Israel. This is the idea that it was a response to World War II that caused mass migration to Israel is totally fabricated. I mean, there was, of course, a mass migration, but there had been migration, some might even call it mass migration, to where Israel now is for many, many years. In fact, they even have a word for it. The word is, and excuse my pronunciation again, aliyah, A-L-I-Y-A. It's a Hebrew word, aliyah. And in Hebrew history, immigration of Jews from the diaspora, so Jews across the world immigrating to the geographical land of Israel, is called aliyah. And there's been a lot of aliyahs gone. There's, in fact, the first aliyah happened in the 1800s. The second aliyah happened in right about 1900. The third aliyah, depending on which historian is telling the story, started right after 1917, 1918, 1919. So this was not the first mass migration to Israel. It wasn't even the second mass migration to Israel. It was the third mass migration to Israel. In fact, the migration to Israel after World War II isn't the fourth or the fifth, or, I mean, I guess maybe it was the sixth or seventh. It doesn't even have a name. There is no numbered name for the aliyah.
They stopped counting after like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's just happening now. It's happening consistently.
Right. And so, anywho, the Jews had been moving into the area for a long, long time, so much so that they even had a word for it, and they had to start putting numbers before the word. And indeed, the Jews and the Arabs were living together in the area for quite some time. Now,
yeah, it seems like they were getting along too a little bit. I mean, not entirely,
they
but
were getting along.
Yeah.
They were at least existing.
Existing, yeah.
But so 1917, the Balfour Declaration, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that is what gave Britain control of Israel. They were now the stewards, the owners, the controllers of Israel, and that started the first separation, at least in this modern history, the first separation from Jews and Arabs in the region. It was because of Britain winning World War I, taking control of the Ottoman Empire, or at least half of it, splitting with France. And then they started splitting it up. At the same time, and when I say at the same time, Gons, I mean literally the exact same time that they are beginning the Israeli project. This was the very first hints of the Northern Ireland and Irish actual separation. Now, the history of Ireland and Britain being in conflict, sort of being colonized, sort of being controlled by Britain is a long one. It had been happening for quite some time. But at the same time that Britain is causing a split in Israel, they are also officially starting to split Ireland from Northern Ireland. Now, it's a little bit smaller. It was 6 counties of Ulster, which is in the Northern Irish area, that were given the choice. And what was this choice? This choice, the British occupation of Ireland was long and storied for many, many years, but the British control of the island was starting to get a little shaky. And so you had 2 groups. You've, of course, had the nationalists, the Irish people who wanted Ireland to be free. It wasn't even the idea of like, hey, we don't want 2 Irelands, we want one. It was one Ireland. They just wanted separation from Britain. And then you had Britain, who had a very strong occupation in Northern Ireland. There's a whole lot of history to this, but the long and the short of it was that in 1916, 1917, England had started letting Ireland rule themselves. They were still occupied, they were still owned by Britain, but they started letting the Irish make their own rules. But the British had a very strong contingent of people in Northern Ireland who were loyal. So there were 6 counties that decided, we don't want to rule ourselves. We want to rule you. We want you to rule us, Britain. Yeah. And of course, this idea came from the British people who were now living in Northern Ireland, and they wanted to stay connected to the crown. And so you have the official splitting of, well, I want to say the official splitting. You have the first splitting of Northern Ireland from Ireland, and you have the first splitting happening in the Middle East. It's literally happening at the same time. The king, I think it was a king at that point of England. Maybe it was a queen. I don't know. I think it was a king. I should have looked that up. That would have been a very easy thing to look up. I didn't do it, though. But the King of England was like sitting at a table with all of his army guys around him and all of the, bankers and all of the industry leaders.
King George V. During that time.
King George V, yeah. That's right. He's sitting there with all of his homies at the table, trying to figure out what to do with the world.
Yeah, we just established the central bank in America. We must use what accent is this? I don't know what's happening.
I don't know, but it sounds good. To my American ears, that could be a British accent.
Over here in Palestine, over here Ireland.
Yeah, they had a lot going on. And he's talking to one guy. He says, "Okay, yeah, let's start moving the Jews into Israel. Start, separating the population." And then he's like, "Okay, whew, got that done. What a good day of work." And another guy taps on his shoulder. He's like, "What do we do about the Ireland thing?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, split that too. Just split everything."
Here's the template. Just use the one we used over here. Just the same thing, right?
Yeah. Seems like a good idea. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. All right, I'm going to take a nap.
What if it was a mix-up in paperwork? I mean, Ireland and Israel, pretty close when it comes to spelling and all that.
Yeah,
what's up?
the pieces of paper got stuck together. And now we move on to the year 1922. Very interesting year here, specifically because Britain. Have you ever heard of a little thing called the League of Nations, Gons?
Oh, yeah. The group of nations, and no, there's no conspiring of nations going on or anything, but they get together and talk about how they are going to control the world. Yeah.
Yeah, League of Nations, sort of this proto geopolitical unholy alliance of all the superpowers who want to decide the fate of the rest of the world. Well, Britain obtained a mandate from the League of Nations. So you have kind of this first, it was not the first, but an early version of League of Nations, a geopolitical alliance of all the world's elites, actually giving a mandate to another country. I mean, recently we've seen this kind of happen in different ways. World Health, what is it called? Organization. Oh, whoa. World Health Organization. You've got the
United
WEF,
Nations.
the
Yeah.
World Economic Forum. You've got these, sort of big elite groups giving mandates to countries. Well, in 1922, Britain obtained a mandate from the League of Nations to administer the territory of the Ottomans, that's Israel and Palestine. During the mandate, the area saw successive waves of Jewish immigration and the rise of nationalist movements in both Jewish and Arab communities. So you start having some very serious conflicts between the two groups. In this case, you're talking in a political sense, you're talking basically Western Jews and Middle Eastern Arabs trying to get together, and things got a little tense. Things get a little tense there. And so you have further sort of establishing official boundaries of, Jewish areas and Arab communities. The borders start getting drawn, this sort of thing. And at the same time, in Northern Ireland, in 1922, this was the official, on paper, separation. The maps were drawn, the borders were laid for a separation of Northern Ireland and Ireland. And Ireland being a free state, the free state of Ireland with its own government, its own rule. It's not burdened by the control of Great Britain. And you've got Northern Ireland, who is now officially separated from Ireland, and Northern Ireland is under British rule.
So this is like a two-state solution. Conclusion.
Squared.
Yeah.
It's a two-state solution squared.
Squared.
You've got a two-state solution on the island of Ireland. You've got a two-state solution starting to crop up in the Middle East. Indeed, that's kind of where when the actual words two-state solution start cropping up. So the idea of a two-state solution has been there since very, very early, and it happened almost perfectly in parallel with the Irish issue, as maybe a lord might have said it. And, there's some interesting connections, of course, with the Rothschilds in the Middle East. There are some interesting connections with the Rothschilds in Ireland, particularly during the potato famine. And so you've got these almost parallel dimensions happening from across the world, but being perpetrated by the exact same force. You've got Britain, but by extension, you've got the League of Nations. It's not just the King of England who's making these decisions. There is influence from what at that time would have been called the one world government of the League of Nations, having their hand in both of these in both of these situations.
And the League of Nations being something that came together post World War I, similar to how many of the groups came together, international institutions came together after World War II. So it seems to be a pattern here.
Yep. And it's very interesting because you've got the West, you've got Britain, who, as we have all learned, benefits from conflict, from the Israel-Palestinian conflict, a political conflict that ultimately serves to destabilize the region for the economic benefit of the West. But even from the very beginning, it was the spoils of war of Britain after the First World War. And you've also got Britain benefiting from the conflict in Ireland and Northern Ireland, keeping these split up places divided in the language of religion. And the religious language is very important. And it's obviously intentional and a very clever ruse by the forces in Britain, because it works. It simply works. If you have political differences in a region, you make it religious. And I'm not saying that these, members of these religions don't want to hurt each other. That's certainly true, but the very core of these conflicts did not start with a religious conflict. It starts with a political conflict. The religious sort of overlay and language is very intentionally used to make the stakes existential.
Right.
Because your average potato farmer in Ireland isn't really so concerned about, some high level politics going on. It doesn't necessarily feel like an existential threat to a potato farmer. And the same thing in the Middle East, the who draws your borders and who, gets your taxes is not necessarily the most important thing in your life. But if you turn it into if you put religious language on it, you've now made the stakes of your political conflict into, you've turned them into eternal stakes. They are existential stakes.
Yes.
Where you can't let the other political guy get his way, because then everybody's going to hell in a handbasket, literally.
We're seeing that exact language being used right now in the conflict with Israel and Palestine, people on social media and elsewhere, even leadership, saying that this is a matter of good and evil. It is a moral situation, therefore eternal consequences, cosmic level, consequences.
Oh yeah.
It's the way into a person's heart.
Yeah. Even if the American politicians aren't saying, that this is whatever, Christian versus, it's not Yahweh versus Allah or whatever.
Right.
They are
can't go
using
there. It's
religious
too
language
confusing.
to influence the public for their own political purposes. And as we know, political purposes turn into economic purposes, and somebody's always getting rich by keeping people sort of religiously fired up for the cause. Just to distinguish one more time, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, the Jews are sort of representative of the West. We kind of think of Israel as the Middle East, and they're Middle Easterners, but really, Israel is a Western project. It was Western Jews who moved in. It was Western nations that drew the borders. It was Western. It was sort of the trophy of the West after not just World War II, but also World War I.
Yeah.
And so you have the Western political interests clashing with the Middle Eastern political interests, the Arabs. I mean, the Arabs who have very sort of robust political systems throughout the Middle East.
Theocratic, to be specific, yeah.
Right. In the same way, you had the same thing in Northern Ireland. The Catholics, they were influenced by Rome. They weren't necessarily big fans of Protestantism or England. You had Protestants, of course, that were being influenced and were led by the British Anglican Protestants. And so this helped maintain influence. It helped keep the divisions alive that gave the public the morale and the will and the spirit to actually play out these political purposes, literally as pawns. And of course, it's not just, in the media right now, these are sort of put in different ways. They're saying it's, that the framing is that like Palestinians are the locals, it's the locals versus the colonizers, the natives versus the colonizers. This is a sort of a very extremely recent phenomenon that this is the new language being put on it.
Yeah.
But as we saw in Ireland, pretty much everybody were locals. For the most part, it was just all Irish people with different influences. In Palestine, in early 19th century Palestine, they were all locals. The Jews were local and the Palestinians were local. They were living together for a long time. The Jews had been mass immigrating into the area for like 100 years or something.
Yeah,
Everybody was
gotta have
locals.
the paperwork. Yeah, it's all about the paperwork and who gets to be at the top of the food chain when it comes to some of this. But I do have a question for you because
Sure.
I know you have your list of things and we're going through everything. In the context of the UK, or I guess the Crown or the British Crown, or however there are specific ways. I guess Americans don't get it right when it comes to the labeling of that from the
there's a lot of very subtle differences, and
Sure.
you'll hear in the interview. I have a hard time with them myself.
For our purposes, let's just call it the Rothschild regime. They seem to be the common thread here between the Irish situation and the Israel situation. In
Western
the context,
economic banking system being
Right.
sort of the driver.
right. So if we are to compare sides here, because in the Ireland conflict, the Northern Ireland conflict, the unionists or the Protestants, they were the ones that wanted Northern Ireland to be part of the UK, correct?
Correct.
So they would be sort of your Jews that live in Israel today. They are part of. They want to stay
the
as
Western
part of
influence.
Right.
The Western influence in the region. Right.
And then your nationalists, which is confusing because sometimes they're called Republicans, right? I think.
It gets confusing.
It's very
for
confusing for
Americans.
us. Yeah, they're mainly Catholic, and they wanted a united Ireland.
One
Ireland, which is interesting because in the Israel context, they want a one Israel, right? They don't necessarily.
Oh, yeah.
So it's confusing in that sense, but it's more so if we are to do a one-to-one comparison, they're more like the Palestinians, or in the modern context, where they live there and they. I don't know. It's not exact. It's not an exact one-to-one.
Yeah, you can't. And
which
this
is the problem.
what.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and this is the problem when you read mostly mainstream articles about this, is they're all very simplistic because they want to identify the good guy and the bad guy.
Right.
They
right.
want to identify one side versus the other side without acknowledging that the real cause of the conflict is Western economic interests. It's not a religious battle. It is only a political battle in the sense that, politics is how the rich guys get even richer. So if you try to split it into sort of this one side versus the other, it will be split forever. You will never get consensus.
Yeah.
But when you take a step back and you realize that it's not Israel versus Palestine and it's Northern Ireland versus Ireland, it's Great Britain. It is Western
elite,
economic.
The elite of you can say UK. That's what they were, but it's more so an elite class.
Well, and even exactly, the elite class, because even above necessarily nationalist interests
For the
of
UK.
Britain, you've got the League of Nations.
Right.
It is literally not Israel versus Palestine or Northern Ireland versus Ireland. It's the League of Nations, the elite ruling class of the whole world, is doing the splitting on purpose between these two things. And of course, for economic interests are always at the bottom of it.
It's almost, if you look at team sports, because, I follow a little bit of sports ball. I know you don't, Basil, but there's a lot of analogies that could be drawn here, because you have your owners. Your owners have their own kind of group. They are their own level of elite. And then you have the commissioner, who is supposed to be the spokesperson for the owners, who speaks to the players and everything. They kind of, make deals between the owners and the players. And then the players, they all fight for whatever contracts they can get, but and they're battling each other. But also when it comes to the teams, you got team names and stuff. The ownership committee has to agree to the names, but that's for the common people to really get rah-rah over, whether you're the Dolphins or the Eagles or whatever you are. It doesn't matter to the owners. It just gets them going.
I mean, it's almost a perfect metaphor.
Right.
Because, the 49ers and the Steelers are not native, like separate.
The players aren't actual 49ers digging for gold. They're not lineage.
Exactly.
From the
They're
gold.
not lineages. There's nothing inherently that separates the teams. The teams are separated by the owners. The owners are the ones that even create the idea of teams.
They schedule the conflicts, the games.
Yeah. Right. And even higher above that, you've got the long and short of it is, no matter who wins and loses the football game, the league wins.
Yep. Cha-ching.
Yep. The players may get good contracts or lose their contracts.
Some get injured. Yeah.
Losing is bad and winning is good, and there's economic things tied to that. But in the end, it literally does not matter. As long as there is conflict, as long as the teams are fighting each other, the league always wins.
Yeah.
They couldn't care less who wins and loses the games. It literally has no bearing on their goals.
Yeah, they might have preferences. I think there are. If you look at the Israel
fun to
thing,
have preferences.
Yeah, there are certain geographical pride, but also projects that could be part of the situation here.
It's all part of it. Yeah,
it's all part of it. So,
if the Steelers have a good year, and that gets some huge influx. Well, for instance, you've got the Taylor Swift. And the Kelsey thing. Who's that? What team is that? Is that the Chiefs?
Chiefs, something. I don't know. I don't follow football. I don't know why we should go back to football.
Yeah, the Chiefs they have some crazy number of merch sales because of this Taylor Swift thing. So somebody in the league, maybe even the owner of the team, had an interest of the highly specific granular activity within the team because it would bring in a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that all the other team owners are looking for a pop star that they can get together with their QB or something.
Of course. Yeah. This is the best marketing tool you can have, is a celebrity relationship type of tabloid type of thing. So it
may not be that the elites have no investment in who wins, but the long and short of it is, no matter who wins and loses, those at the top win. They win every time.
It is rigged to that effect.
In fact, much like the football team, the only way that the elites lose is if the teams don't play each other.
Yeah.
If the teams don't play, then the elites don't profit. So this is just a fun little way to put into context what's going on around the world, and even bigger, like what the big play is, what the meta sort of analysis of team versus team and conflict versus peace and everything. This is all good stuff to keep in mind as we go through the rest of this episode.
And just to put a bow on the whole sports analogy thing, you just mentioned how one of the ways the owners don't win is if the players don't play. And interestingly enough, in sports, if the players don't play, usually it's because there's some kind of contract negotiation that doesn't work right. And so the players as a union all say, we're not playing, we're boycotting. And then they come to the table, they have to work out a deal. If we're looking at that analogously with all the situation happening with war in general, it really goes back to the Matthew 5. You know, you've heard an eye for an eye, but if you see evil or you have evil done to you or slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him also the other. Turn the other cheek. You know, stop the cycle of violence, basically, which is the message there. It would be interesting if everybody was like, we're going to stop fighting, because then the elite would be somewhat forced to come to the table with actual negotiations, perhaps, and not egging on more fighting, more killing. But that is an extremely difficult thing to do.
In a magical world where Israel and Palestine could come together and agree to not fight one another and could wake up to the fact that there are powers above them that are benefiting from their eternal violence. And, and that's the sort of dream of those who see what's going on around the world. If there were a world that weren't so fallen and we could all get on the same page and realize, and it would only take, it doesn't mean Bibi Netanyahu or Hamas needs to, make peace. But if individual soldiers, if millions and millions suddenly had an awakening and they all decided not to fight, they would have to have Bibi and the leader of Hamas have a fist fight or something if they wanted to settle the difference.
In the metaverse. Let's do it.
Yeah, that would technically be the way that it worked. Unfortunately, I think that until we get to heaven, the chances of that kind of understanding
what if that's the
mass
big
appeal is very slim.
What if that's the big reveal? We're in heaven and Jesus is like, all right, this is how we settle things in heaven. Put on your VR goggles, folks.
Robo battles.
Going into the metaverse to settle these disputes.
Oh, goodness gracious. I would be a little skeptical.
I would be. Start looking around.
I'm going to take you on a walk down the peace wall in Belfast, Ireland. That will give you some very interesting insight both into the Israel-Palestinian conflict and the Northern Ireland Irish conflict. These parallels are not lost on the Irish. And you'll learn that when I talk to Johnny. He's an Irish artist, and he was a peace worker during the Troubles when the peace was being made around the turn of the century. He was part of a group that did a lot of work culturally and politically to bring about peace in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So I thought he was, and not only that, he's an extremely talented artist. And so, he's got that Irish accent, folks. So really dial in. You're going to need to listen up good to make sure you catch everything.
I think the audio equipment, something happened to the audio gear in Ireland. Maybe it was your flight. Maybe it's just the air, the Irish air up there. It's tense.
Right. Unfortunately, the episode from here on out will not be absolute studio quality. However, Gons has done his very best, a valiant effort to make the content listenable. I think he did a great job. But we both have actually taken steps to improve this kind of content in the future. We've invested in some better gear and laid out some strategies that will make these types of things better in the future. So thank you for your patience and thank you for your grace. And first, I'm going to take you down a walk of the Peace Wall. Then I'm going to be talking with Johnny, a very cool friend of mine who lives over there and has done a lot of very relevant work to this conversation. And I hope you guys enjoy. Close your eyes, step into your best buddy Basil's teleportation device and let me whisk you away to the land of Ireland. Hey everybody, your best buddy Basil here, and I've got boots on the ground in Belfast, Ireland here. I teased a couple shows ago the very interesting parallel history between the troubles in Northern Ireland, specifically, particularly in Belfast, but other surrounding cities, and the parallels to what's going on in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so, I am taking a walk down the Belfast streets to go visit the Peace Wall. The Peace Wall was erected to create some sort of barrier between the Protestant and the Catholic populations of Belfast. Interesting thing here. And the wall has been, since the Good Friday Agreement, it's interesting that the wall has not come down. The wall is up. And there's a lot of interesting factors about that. As I'm walking here, I'm walking by what looks to be a church, some sort of non-denominational church, with the title City Life Center. Except for in the big sign here, the F is missing in life. So it's the City Lie Center. I wonder if that's an act of vandalism or an act of God. Who knows? Okay, I'm coming up on the wall here, and immediately what I run into on the corner is, how do you describe that? It's a gigantic sort of billboard-sized printout or banner or something. On one side of it, it has the British flag, memorializing someone named Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, and on the right side, it's got the Israeli flag with "We salute you." There's some Hebrew letters written across the top, and in the English it says, "The future is yours if you have..." Oh, big truck driving in front of me. "The future is yours if you have the will, if you have the faith." Now, this will be an interesting thing to compare as we walk along the Peace Wall here, because there's just sort of an innumerable amount of different messages. The next section of the wall is for, what is this? The Ulster Division, 1916. Interestingly enough, 1916 is the year that, well, as you'll learn in the interview to come, this is a very important year for Northern Ireland. The next piece of the wall here has a picture of it kind of looks like a Stalin figure, but it's got a British flag. I have no idea. Kitchener's Own. Are you one of Kitchener's Own? Oh, we've got a sort of, I don't know, some sort of celebration of British colonialism in India, Australia, and South Africa, Canada, New Zealand, Newfoundland. And it just keeps going, folks. It just keeps going. You've got, I'm coming towards the center area of the wall, and the center area of the wall is very interesting. When I say center, I mean the gate that separates the Protestant from the Catholic parts of Belfast. Now, it's sort of a no man's land. Somebody showing me around said that there's this no man's land in between the two walls, and it's maybe about 100 feet with big spiky gates on either side. And don't worry though, the gates have been painted by what looks to be children. You've got some sort of kindergarten style painting of the gates with green meadows and a blue river and some very happy shapes that I think are people standing on the bridge. and then the wall continues on the other side. In no man's land, right here between the two sides. Two very interesting things. You've got the gigantic sign for New Life City Church, being a God influence, is their tagline there. And across from that, we've got a celebration of International Day of Peace, 21st of September. They've put together sort of a mural that looks like the Imagine, I don't know, what is it, the album cover or something? You know, the Beatles thing. Imagine. In understanding, all walls shall fall down. That's a quote from Khalil Gibran. There's another one here. A further shore is reachable from here, from Seamus Heaney. Oh, Seamus Heaney, very famous Irish poet. Here in the no man's land, there's also been erected a cross, a big, they're calling it the Cross of Crosses, a big sort of a rustic looking cross, and inside that cross are dozens of little mini crosses within crosses. There's a plaque here, it says the Cross of Crosses, marking 45 years of conflict in Northern Ireland. They have the dates set to 1969 through 2014. The plaque continues, "Let this be the year the conflict ends." Sponsored by George McElroy, Ignite 2014. Okay, so we've got sort of a Christian display here. In front of this cross is a little sandbox where others have stuck wooden crosses and what looks to be sort of like fake candles. But that's just the beginning, folks. You know, I'm here. I hinted a couple episodes ago at the interesting parallels, the connections between, the Israeli-Gaza conflict going on right now in the long history of Northern Ireland, which was sort of annexed by the British. And we will be talking more about that specific history later on. I have now made it through the no man's land and have stepped foot onto the Catholic side of Belfast. We've got a gigantic mural with that is here honoring Frederick Douglass. You've got Martin Luther King. You've got Obama. You've got Bob Marley's here. Gotta get the Bob Marley in the peace mural. All sorts of famous figures working for peace. As there is then a panel filled with advertisements. It's looks like a Facebook page. It says Facebook up at the top, 21 years working with youth. The Bites Project. The Bites Project with an apple with a bite taken out of it, of course. There's things on here. Conflict resolution. Facebook.com YIM Bites Project. I'll have to check that out. Now we're getting into some more abstract things here. The next mural says climate change affects everyone, but not equally. Oh, here you go. You've got sort of a dark city landscape. Whew, some people are driving quite fast here. Dark city landscape in the background with smoke billowing up from some sort of industrial area. And that smoke is turning into skulls. In the center, we've got a pair of hands holding the world, holding the globe, but instead of blue water, it is white, and instead of green land masses, you've got scary, screaming figures who are terrified of something. Protruding from the center of this globe are two clock hands. And they are sort of positioned like a scale, pointing in opposite directions. On one side of the scale is the developing world, and on the other side of the scale is the developed world. And a nice little touch here at the bottom of it. You've got the Statue of Liberty that is tipping over and underwater. Now, here's where we come to the first mention of what I've been interested in. Now we have a mural. And this mural is of two jail windows. Two windows with bars on them, opposite each other. Reaching through the bars in the jail windows are two sets of hands. One pair of hands is clothed in a sleeve of the Irish colors, the Irish flag. The other hand is clothed, sleeved in the colors of the Palestinian flag. And it says here, Solidarity POWs, prisoners of war. And there's also some, what looks to be Arabic writing above it. So the impression here is that, well, right there, solidarity for the prisoners of war, for both Irish, maybe, I guess, Northern Irish, and Palestinians, a sort of direct connection. And those hands are holding each other's hands from each of their jail windows. And this is what I'm talking about, folks. A very interesting connection. There is not just a comparison being made by this artist, but specifically solidarity between the two. Now, you'll hear more about the ideas of prisoners of war in these, well, at least on the Irish side of this comparison. But the idea being that the conflict for freedom from Britain by the Irish is directly compared to the Palestinian conflict for freedom from the Israeli situation. And it keeps going. The next mural here is Army of the People. It says Battle of the Falls. Falls Curfew 1917. And this is filled with history and pictures, lots of photos of the Battle of the Falls. You know what? I'm going to go over there. I'm going to read it because this sounds interesting. Crossing the street. Oh, here we go. It says here, okay, let's learn some history together, folks. This says Falls Curfew. Now, Falls, for those, well, I didn't mention it. The road that we are on is called Falls. So, it says the Falls Curfew, also called the Battle of the Falls, was a British Army operation during the 3rd to the 5th of July, 1970. Oh, 4th of July, 1970. Operations began as a search for weapons. Attacks from youths with bottles and petrol bombs quickly descended into fierce gun battles between British soldiers and the Irish Republican Army trying to defend the area. As a quick review, the Irish Republican Army is the Irish people who were fighting for freedom from Great Britain. So they were trying to defend this neighborhood from the British soldiers. It goes on. An imposed curfew lasting 36 hours quickly followed as thousands of British troops moved in, carrying out a house-to-house search for weapons, causing much destruction to homes. Large amounts of CS gas were used, and civilians suffered severe abuse from soldiers. On 5th of July, the curfew was brought to an end as thousands of women and children from Andersontown marched into the area with food for besieged locals. The British Army admitted afterwards that some of its soldiers had been involved in looting. The Falls Curfew was a turning point in the Troubles. It is seen as having turned many Catholics/nationalists against the British Army and having boosted support for the IRA. Okay, so, we've got some very official-looking historical documents up here telling the stories, some of the specific stories about what has caused so much trouble here in the Troubles. The next panel is this our city? Is a quote. Hashtag build homes now. Quote, we have a vision of a better Belfast. When you're in a hostel for so long, it starts to feel like a jail. It's just so irritating and frustrating. It looks like, we've got some Arab writing on the left, some English on the right. I guess this is advocating to build more houses for the Catholic side of Belfast. And you will hear later on in the talk I had with Johnny McEwen exactly what that's referring to. The next one is very fun. A gigantic mural, a big red mural that says the Workers' Party, socialist, secular, anti-sectarian, for workers' unity and socialism, liberté, égalité, fraternité. So we've got very specifically sort of an advertisement for the Socialist Party in the area. And next up, we've got a mural that is, what is this? I guess commemorating O'Callaghan, some fella named O'Callaghan. And again, it says here in English, peace is more difficult than war. We were not scared as we resisted. We will not be scared when we make peace. There's a quote by Abdullah O'Callaghan, PKK Kurdistan Worker Party, a revolutionary, a prisoner in solitary confinement since February of 1999. And this harkens to an interesting part of the situation for Northern Ireland is this peace wall really is reaching out, making reference to conflicts all around the world. They are connecting to conflicts that I've really never heard of, and maybe that's on purpose. Maybe these are conflicts that maybe the powers that be don't want to be made known. And so these murals are put up on the peace wall in order to not only draw attention to conflicts around the world, but also to connect the Northern Irish conflict and the plight of its people to broader international stories, things like that. And that was something that I had no idea about. We've heard about the Troubles. Once in a while, they'll, make it on a reference to the Troubles or make it on a TV show or something. But this peace wall here in Belfast truly is a gigantic sort of memorial or something to almost the idea of conflict. Now we've got a gigantic poster for the Irish Republican Prisoners Committee. Shows some hands holding some jail bars here. And they really are just sort of advertisements for joining different organizations that may be paramilitary organizations or bureaucratic organizations or activist organizations. Another big one here is, this is a fist raised in solidarity. The fist is colored with the colors of the Irish flag. The fist is holding within its grip a bunch of barbed wire that is curling around. It looks very painful. There's some blood dripping out. On either side of the fist are two AK-47s, sort of computer generated. They look like maybe they took the assets from Call of Duty or something, but so it's a very intense, very militaristic image, and it says Irish Republican National Congress, join the IRNC, Belfast. So active invitation to get involved in the conflict that some very much consider to still be raging. And that's kind of the idea. As you continue down the wall It is reference, mural on mural on mural, or reference and then advertisement for these conflicts. Sometimes it's not clear if it's denouncing the conflicts or celebrating the conflicts. It's really not. There's nothing like it in the United States. This one is very interesting. We've got some names: Danny Loughran, Matt McLaren, Paul McCann, Martin McElkearney, and Gino Gallagher. It says fallen comrades of the Irish National Liberation Army. You've got on either side sort of blurry, sort of pixelated pictures of men in green fatigues covering their faces with green cloth, wearing berets and sunglasses, and kneeling in front of red stars. You've got a man holding a gun. You've got pictures of these individuals, again overlaid over red stars. And then you've also got a red star which in front of it is a fist holding an AK-47. So the sort of militaristic imagery keeps on going. Oh, and good. I'm running into a mural here with what I'm assuming is a bunch of sort of Andy Warhol-esque depictions. I'd say, I'm going to guess, of, I don't know, general peaceful characters or peace activists or something. Jesus is definitely on there. We got Jesus. So I'm kind of having to base the rest on that. That's Jesus, and I have no idea who any of these other people are. These may actually be individuals who are directly related to the conflict. Let's see here on the text on the bottom of this gigantic picture of someone with a beard. It says, "It is not those who can inflict the most, but those who can endure the most who will conquer." And endure they do. Here's somebody. This is a pretty easy one. You've got South African flag and an Irish flag waving sort of into each other. And Nelson Mandela, the guy from the Mandela Effect, raising a fist here in solidarity and peace. Here's a quote: "In my country, we go to prison first and then become president. Madiba Nelson Mandela, freedom lover, friend of Ireland." I did not know that. I'm glad that they were friends. Okay, now here's a big one that's very on target here. A giant poster board, permanent poster board, that says RNU stands with Palestine. The RNU is Republican Network for Unity. This is a sort of Irish freedom organization. It says Viva Palestine. In the middle here, we've got sort of a spooky image of, a person's face that is sort of colored with the Palestinian colors, with a hand over their mouth. And you guessed it, the hand has the Israeli flag. And this just goes on like forever. Remember, this wall continues down the entire stretch of Belfast. And interesting thing about, you'd think with walls in this sort of situation, we've seen these things before, and there's always this story about after a conflict the wall is taken down and peace and things like that, but this wall still stands and is being used not just to place murals. Murals are not the only thing going on with this wall. Up at the top of the wall, almost got hit by a bus. That's fun. The top of the wall is still adorned with spiky deterrents from climbing it. Let's see here. This is CR gas and the burning of Long Kesh. All right, something else going on here. Operation Pagoda. The British government authorized and sanctioned the use of a chemical weapon against Irish Republican prisoners. Members of the 22nd SAS carried out the attack from a helicopter. There sure is a lot of opportunities to start Googling and learning more about what's going on. Now, in the area that I currently am standing, the wall is about, I'm going to guess, maybe 15 feet high, including the spikes on the top. But there are parts of the wall that cross the city that start with the original brick wall rising up about 15 feet. And then on top of that, there's another 15 feet of concrete, which was obviously added later. And then on top of that, there's another 15 feet of sort of metal, similar to the southern border wall in the United States. The thing is absolutely gigantic. I've never seen a wall, a freestanding wall, that stands so tall. Here we've got a mural dedicated to the Spring Hill West Rock Massacre in Belfast on Sunday the 9th of July, 1972. Still no inquest, still no justice. And it goes and it goes and it goes, folks. Now, this is what's considered to be the international part of the wall, which is, again, standing in solidarity or condemning or celebrating different conflicts around the world. But it also has a lot of the references to the Irish struggle. This is something that maybe if you were of age in the 90s, you probably were seeing going on the news. But the fact that it is not sort of, the details are not more widely known, honestly continues to surprise me the more that I learn. We've got a mural here, the Palestinian flag. Oppression breeds resistance. You've got a man, this is a very interesting one. Somebody really got creative. You've got a man who is missing his legs, and he is in a wheelchair. A man with his legs below the knee have been amputated. He's in a wheelchair. He looks very determined. He's swinging above his head what we would know as a sling, like the kind David used to slay Goliath. But loaded into the sling, it's not a stone, not a pebble from the river, but it looks like a quart of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I don't know if that was added later or if there's some sort of significance of that. I know that Ben & Jerry's is part of the BDI, boycott, divest, and something else. A campaign American progressives and liberals like to, promote, where you boycott Israeli companies. And Ben & Jerry's did join the boycott of Israel, I believe, last year. So maybe that's some sort of nod to that. Who knows? They took his land, his legs, and finally his life. We've got another one here. Palestine, 1917 through today. They have the various maps of the changes of the Palestinian the territories. It says it's time for the Irish government show some humanity and act for the Palestinian people. And there's a list here. 1, officially recognize the state of Palestine. 2, impose economic sanctions on Israel. Okay, yeah, there's the Ben & Jerry's reference. 3, end all diplomatic ties to apartheid state. Boycott Israel, an apartheid state. There it is, right there. Okay, so some more direct. This comes from the Shea Scholarship. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but a red star follows it. There's a little sign in the bottom here. It says, immediate expulsion of all Israeli diplomats from Ireland. A call to expel Israeli diplomats from the country of Ireland. And it goes and it goes and it goes. So very interesting, folks. Some boots on the ground here in Northern Ireland. A bit of a surprise trip. One thing that really is included in this. There are buildings and homes and things that are right up against the wall, living just feet away from the wall. And they look like, well, right now I'm walking by what looks to be like a preschool. Very stout, short, green building. It's very long. And there's a giant blue gate in front of it. Behind that gate is another black gate. And behind that, over each and every one of the windows, which are adorned with child's artwork, are cages. And these cages are much more robust than sort of the normal security bars you would see on a particular building. And you see this over on the Catholic side of the wall as well, where buildings that are built right up, homes that are built right up against the wall, they'll be, 10 feet away from the wall. These homes will have built a cage over the back of the house to protect the home and anybody standing in the backyard from things that are thrown over the wall. I was told stories about as recently as the, I believe, late 90s, there were times when the Protestant side were throwing things over the wall, the gigantic wall. Somehow they're getting things thrown over. And it could be bricks, it could be bottles, it could be Molotov cocktails, and in one case was a grenade. And so these cages that are built on the houses are built for the purpose of protecting homes and children from bricks and bottles and grenades. The construction of this area is very interesting. There are almost no individual houses. Now, right now, I guess I am on the Catholic side right now. There's a Palestinian flag flying from one of the homes of a resident on the Catholic side. Very interesting, and we talk about this a little bit more later, that the sort of religious categorizations of the Northern Irish conflict are almost inconsequential. It's not disagreements on theology. It's not disagreements on, epistemology or ecclesiology. It is simply a political distinction between Catholics and Protestants, and it is the Catholic side that is in such support of the Palestinians. Now, I'm going to get quiet for just a second. This was something that I was warned about. There are lots of tours and tour guides, unofficial and official, that come by these pieces of the wall. Now, you might be tempted to think that because of the Good Friday agreements, the official peace found between the two sides, I believe in 1999, I might need to be corrected on that, that things might have settled down. But the reality is, after talking to many Northern Irish people, is that the conflict still boils underneath the surface. And tourists come to participate in what's called Troubles tourism, which has a sort of mixed reaction. And I was told, hold on a second. Acting totally natural. Crossing the street. I'm going to cross the street here while I have the chance. I was told that you kind of got to be careful when you are speaking. Acting totally natural. Especially when you come around people giving tours. the Catholic and the Protestant sides, they obviously have their own version of the story. And I was told to be very careful about talking specifics when you are at the wall, because it is not unheard of that if somebody does not like the way you are speaking about the conflict, that they will certainly let you know. And that can include various means of silencing you. So I'm going to try not to get myself in some trouble here. There's one more gigantic billboard type mural here. It says, for what died the sons of Royson, unbowed, unbroken. On one side, we've got someone named Oglach Charlie Hughes, Leonel, a lot of stuff I don't know how to say, and Leila Khaled. Again, we've got the Irish flag on the Oglach Charlie Hughes side, a black and white photo of a young man holding a rifle, although he's wearing a black tie and a suit, which is respectable. Leila Khaled looks like a young Middle Eastern woman. She is wearing some classic Middle Eastern head coverings, and she is holding an AK-47, and in big letters across it says, "Our struggle continues." So one more direct connection between the Northern Irish and the Palestinian conflicts. Give me a second here. Here's our friend Mandela again. Oh, going back to, I'm now turning around. I'm going to head back to the gate that is separating the Catholic from the Protestant side. There's sort of a very aggressive looking man. I'm going to be very sensitive. Yes, he's one of the black taxi drivers, who is the classic taxi company that gives the Troubles tourism. Oh, there's a whole line of them. Okay, here we go. A whole line of the Troubles tours. Sounds like they're getting back in. As I hurry on back, I scuttle on back to the other side of the wall. We'll be crossing into the no man's land again. And a very interesting part of the whole shebang is that they do indeed close the gates at night. And not just one of them. They close all the gates, as far as I am aware. So if you are stuck on the wrong side of town, you will remain stuck on the wrong side of town. That is one of the parts that really surprised me the most, is that the wall is an active wall. It's an active separation. They close the gates every night to keep the riffraff from crossing over. And as you'll hear in my conversation that I had with Johnny, there's been lots of attempts to sort of de-escalate, take down the wall, soften the borders, these types of things. But it is always immediately met with a lot of resistance from normal people, normal citizens. The wall continues to give them sort of a peace of mind at night. That makes them feel safe, even though, as far as daily violence or anything like that is concerned, has sort of entered a new era. The idea of taking down the wall that was erected to keep the two sides separate makes people very uncomfortable. Especially, there are groups and people who continue to work for peace in the region, doing this through education. Oh, there's a vape on the ground. Education and art and community building and things like this. It is not easy. The idea of taking down the wall is almost entirely abandoned. Instead, they work towards softening the wall, which includes putting up pieces of art, maybe changing the materials. So instead of a brick wall, you put maybe a fence or a gate. But it is an extraordinarily slow process going on decades now. And that's about it for this part of the wall. I will come back at you if there is something that needs to be commented on. But I will say the atmosphere, very interesting atmosphere, very charged. Oh, I suppose I should take some pictures for y'all. I'll go back, I'll take some pictures. But very charged. It is not presented as history. It is not necessarily a memorial to a time gone by. It is very present, which is sort of an unusual feeling for an American to have signs of present danger or a constructed object as a sign. Hold on. As a sign and a reminder to a current and ongoing threat in your area. Okay. That's that then, folks. If I find anything else that needs to be said or shown, I will go ahead and get at you. But I think it's about time we talk to an Irish person about what's going on here. I think, of course, in the Israeli-Gaza conflict, walls are a big part of that as well, a big active part of what's going on a daily basis. Again, something we don't really have a whole lot of contact with in the U.S. We have our own wall talk about the southern border, but I don't know if I feel a particular fraternity as far as walls go as with the Northern Irish. Okay, I'll get back to you, see if something happens.
Well, nice job there, Basil, and I'm glad you made it home safe. But, man, I could smell the gasoline from the cars just whizzing by. It sounded, in my mind's eye, there were cars brushing up against you. Your shirt was flying in the air. I had a lot of visuals going on in my head.
Oh,
but
yeah. I mean, that's the very interesting thing about Belfast is in the U.S., there would be a visitor center and a big lawn and some picnic tables for when you go hang out at the monument that is the Peace Wall. But it is an active peace wall. There are, trash trucks and loud noises. It's a sidewalk that people use to get to work, which is walking right past the thing that signifies such a long history of conflict in the area. It is not a monument. It is an active, working peace wall, even today.
Yeah, and it got me thinking, especially when you were trying to you started getting a little hush-hush. Maybe some people around that might hear me talking wrong and stuff. And wow, if that's what it's like on the ground, then we have no hope on the internet if things continue the way they're going.
Yeah, and I want to say two things. One of them is, the sort of ghosts of the conflict are still very active. There are still very passionate people on both sides. In fact, it was only back in 2021, there was still some sectarian violence. There's a bus bombing back in 2021. It is very real, and you do not want to play. You don't want to play around or joke around with it too much with
Yeah.
people that you don't know.
Well,
I was warned very seriously to be careful and sensitive as to who can hear me say what.
Well, I was going to say, I didn't know when I was going to bring this up, but this whole episode, putting it together and looking into this conflict, it finally clicked for me. I had a couple Irish friends in college. One of them was a Catholic, Sean Carter. The other one was a Protestant, John O'Grady. And one of them would always invite us over for some hookah and drinks. This is back in college. This is a long time ago for me. And it was supposed to be a nice, peaceful evening, a weekend, college students, hanging out, get together. But every single time, Sean Carter and John O'Grady would get into a debate, some kind of theological debate, or sometimes even a debate about this issue. And I wasn't aware of it to the extent I am now. So I was always like, oh, here they go again. But yeah, I mean, they would get so passionate about their stance. And they were friends and teammates and stuff. But it did come to blows a couple times. So I have seen firsthand the effects, the deep-rooted emotional effects of this conflict in my college years back in the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's very interesting. And as we always have to remember, it's principalities and powers that are ruling over this earth. And the sort of spiritual ancestry of these conflicts, even if peace is found, the sort of spiritual ancestry of these conflicts will live on in further generations in a way that makes no sense outside of a supernatural worldview.
Yeah, 100%. So you were able to sit down with Johnny.
Yeah. So Johnny, a very cool guy, very interesting fellow, very smart, very engaged with his community. I went to his, I don't know what to call it, an artist studio or something like that, in a sort of abandoned office building. And in this building, it was, well, just like any office building. It was room upon room upon room. There's a bathroom on every floor. There was a small break room with a sink and with a refrigerator. And this has been turned into a sort of collective, an artist collective. And you may think, oh, these hippy-dippy artists always living in abandoned buildings and, I don't know, selling paint splatters for change on the street. But actually, this artist collective has played a very important role in the sort of culture of peace that has been very intentionally and very laboriously built by Northern Irish and Irish who Catholics and Protestants, everybody who is trying their best to heal the wounds. For this interview, I'm sitting in a small, formerly office. It was probably 20 feet by 25 feet, scattered around the floor and on easels and in stacks all around me are paintings that Johnny's working on. He tells me about his new art style that he's trying out with ink, different colors of ink, and then bleach poured on the ink, and then more ink on the bleach, which is really a very engaging style. But there's probably about 30 or 40 paintings on the ground that are actively drying. The smell of bleach and the smell of ink are noticeable, very noticeable, especially as I sit there. I have a mini recorder set out in front of Johnny, and I have my iPhone in my hand, and he's very gracious and sitting down and talking with me and exploring this parallel between the two conflicts, and also giving me a little bit of history about what the process of building a culture of peace in Belfast, not just finding political peace, but trying to build a culture of peace within the hearts and the minds and the spirits of the people who live there.
Why don't we start with who you are and where we are and what that is.
We're in my studio, which is chaos, and there's lots of inky drawings and paintings scattered on the floor. My name is Johnny McEwen. I'm an artist, and this studio is a part of a studio group called Vault Artist Studios.
Yeah.
And we started 5 years ago. There was 18 of us, and it was supposed to be just for a temporary space that was in an old bank that was lying empty, and we inhabited the space for a year. And by the end of, we ended up being staying there for 2 years. And by the end of those 2 years, we started to become community. So we kind of decided to look for somewhere together. And we found this amazing theatre, school, science block thing that had been lying empty. And that became the Vault. And we went from 18 up to 80 artists and then up to 120 artists.
And they let you use the building specifically for this purpose?
So basically, the building was destined to be social housing, but they hadn't got planning permission. It wasn't happening yet. And meanwhile, it was starting to be inhabited by pigeons and feral kids. And fires were starting to get lit. So it was so us being there did two things. It meant that because we had formed ourselves as a charity at that stage, then we didn't have to pay rates. They didn't have to pay rates.
Yeah.
So there's a cost then, and then we were looking after the building, and improving the building, and also improving the area and how people felt about moving there. So it's quite a well done area. Yeah. And then we brought it to life, and so it's a really success story. And then eventually our time there came to an end because they are starting to build now. And so we tried to find new spaces, and we couldn't find one space that would cope for everybody. So we've split now between two spaces.
Yeah.
One, Shackle Road and Shackle Mission building, an old church building, has a very nice churchy feel to it. And then this is a soulless office space in town that we're hoping to kind of impose our creativity on.
Yeah, bring some soul to
So we're right in the city centre now, in Belfast.
Yeah, I mean, you're right next to Victorian Square, which is like the commercial heartbeat of downtown Belfast.
And we're at the edge of the cathedral quarter where the cultural stuff and the circus school's just around the corner, and the music centre. That's kind of, so there's a lot of kind of culture stuff happening that we can now invite people.
Well, I think that's like one of the things that at least a lot of Americans don't know about Belfast is that there's like a lot of actual culture going on here. So when we think of Europe, it's like Paris or Venice or something, but Belfast has like a vibrant modern culture sort of.
Yeah, and a lot of it is kind of grassrootsy, kind of people doing their own thing rather than it's severely underfunded. But I think that actually makes people have to do something. So Vault doesn't get any funding. We do this ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So I kind of one of the things I do is I still have a background in working in peace building, reconciliation. We've called it various things over the years, and kind of applied creativity within that.
Yeah,
possible. I would take a group every year. Still a legacy thing of a group of students from America who come over spring break time, and the first was a couple of years where I took them to the Peace Walls, and it was a miserable day, and it was just so depressing. And then we went somewhere beautiful to stay up the north coast, and the two stories just didn't match. So what I've started doing is to bring them to the Vault or take them on a street art walking tour, so you see the cultural vibrancy and try and make sense of. So there's this cultural vibrancy and there's this conflict that's superimposed upon that and exists alongside that, and that's a more interesting story.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think there's another thing. First of all, a lot of people listening to this they'll know about the Troubles, mainly because I've brought up the Troubles several times, mainly because you've talked to me about the Troubles. But like the Peace Wall, the wall that separated the Protestant from the Catholic areas of town, still standing. The gates still close at night.
Yeah.
But the wall is sort of covered in an attempt to...
Well, I think it's... Yeah. Once it went up, we have a history of putting political stuff on walls, and also of territory marking with walls. And so what was on a dividing wall, I think initially it was just kind of paramilitary graffiti, so from either pro-IRA or pro-UVF or whatever side you would be supporting.
Yeah.
So it would be either, and then there was some peace night type attempts at going. I remember 7 years is enough, don't make it 8.
Mm.
You know, and then 8 years enough, don't make it 9, and 9, and eventually at 12 they stopped. And we ended up having 30 years of conflict that we euphemistically call the Troubles.
Yeah. Is that euphemist? Oh,
the Troubles is kind of like, yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Having a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Rather than, and also we couldn't. Yeah. Whether or not it was a war is a kind of contentious thing itself, because if it's a war, then there's prisoners of war. We have special status, so that's kind of what some of the IRA combatants who were in jail were then went on hunger strike to try and get that political status to get recognised as soldiers in a war. And then there were hunger strikes and people died, and then that was the height of the Troubles, I would say, was whenever people were going hunger strike and dying, and then the funerals were happening. The funerals of them were attacked by the loyalists, and then there was more violence, and then it was scary days.
What was the time period you're specifically referring to?
So that was, I think mid-90s.
Mid-90s, yeah. I mean, I think that's another thing. A lot of people don't realize that it's so recent.
Yeah.
So recent.
So the Good Friday Agreement, which was the beginning, if not the end of the peace process. There's a lot of stuff that led to the agreement, which was then a referendum, North and South. And it was sold as that's peace, and it got voted for. But anybody else who worked in peace building knew that kind of peace was a long way away.
Yeah.
And with that, there's still been quite a lot of attacks and kind of not on in global terms, the Northern Ireland conflict is quite small.
It kind of reads as just like organized crime almost.
I think it's shifted. A lot of people that were involved in fighting for a cause are now involved in other types of criminality. So that's, but what it meant was that Belfast was a really, really safe place, because any of the criminality was focused and controlled. Right. So, and if someone burgled a house, then the local paramedic would have some graffiti saying, "Housebreakers beware," and they would probably get the stuff back.
Interesting.
And then deal with the people in kind of very violent way.
So speaking of art and speaking of the Peace Wall, the Peace Wall has art all the way down it. Some of it is sort of like street graffiti. Some of it, some more, cohesive messaging in the form of murals. And I think what surprised a lot of people, surprised me, was that the Peace Wall in several occasions is sort of pronouncing solidarity with Palestine.
Yeah. There's one particular part of the wall that's called the International Wall, and it's on the Nationalist Republican / Catholic side. And so they would have always historically kind of, as part of the trying to understand their own thing and showing empathy and solidarity with other conflicts around the world, where there's someone under siege, or kind of like there's loads of different conflicts where you go, oh yeah, if that was here, we'd be pick sides.
Yeah.
So that you'll see stuff around kind of Nelson Mandela there, and you'll see stuff around Cuba and stuff around El Salvador and kind of Tamil Tigers and Sri Lanka, and there's kind of like there's anywhere there's conflict, they'll feel sorry. I was in the Basque region, and there again, there's going, yes, if they find you're from Belfast, welcome.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there is a kind of like and historically as well, there's been some kind of, a supply of weapons and training of paramilitaries in some of those areas.
Yeah, all the examples that you mentioned, not only are they sort of conflict zones, but they're sort of these long, drawn out. I mean, it's almost like the people inhabiting the areas have sort of made it the lifestyle, or it's forced upon them. It's like a lifestyle conflict that goes on for generations.
Yeah, and I don't know about all of them actually, but I think there's also kind of like a big player. So either America or Britain have been historically involved, either colonially or or militarily needing something in that area, have been a bigger part of the global politics, and have therefore set one community against the other in many cases.
Yeah.
That didn't exist before. So they kind of, and then they go, we're saying that,
Yeah. Well, it's
these
interesting.
guys are the good guys, and these guys are we score these guys against this.
Yeah.
So that happened in
Which might be
Kosovo and Serbia.
specifically poignant when it comes to Palestine, because from what I understand, Great Britain, like the same process and same, I don't know, legal stuff, like the process of trying to, I don't know if annex is the right word, but what they're doing with Northern Ireland is very similar to what they did in the 20th century, like 1917 Belfast Declaration for Israel.
Yeah, I mean, and Northern Ireland exists because a very careful line was drawn. That was drawn in order to ensure that there'd be a unionist Protestant majority forever. And then last year was the first year when the voting was finished, it turns out there's more people who want to unite Ireland than there are people who want to remain British for the first time since Northern Ireland's existence.
That's a big deal. So 2022 was the first year.
Yeah, so it's always been kind of getting to that. It was a date that kind of some on the Unionist British side would have dreaded happening, and it's happened sooner than some people thought. Partly because more national Catholics have stayed and more Protestants have left, as well as kind of other social factors.
It makes me wonder, in both the Palestinian and the Northern Ireland situation, like what Great Britain, or I don't know, I know these terms like Great Britain or England or the Crown or whatever have specific meanings. I'm American, so it all means the same.
We're using them interchangeably.
Yeah. So the Crown, I'm not sure historically why the Crown would even do what they did, with the exception of causing intentional conflict, just allows them to keep a foot in the door on the island. And
so up until 1916, Britain ran Ireland as a colony, or tried to, and they ran it with the same kind of military force that they used in India, and the same disregard for the local population. So there's that kind of culture of this is how you control a country. Whenever it looked like the unrest, and it was partly the French Revolution, then the Irish Revolution was kind of, the Irish flag is inspired by, was gifted from the French revolutionaries. So it's kind of like there's this whole sense of change. But there was also the First World War, and Britain not controlling Ireland means they've got a very weak flank or a very good base for an attack. And also, if the new Ireland was going to be neutral, which looked very like the case, then they were scared as well. So that's why
it's like a national security.
So that's why, but it also was set up but it was set up as a kind of, that's what the Dublin as capital was a way to suck everything out of Ireland. So Dublin looks quite English in a sense, the old Georgian houses, and kind of has that feeling, because there's this expression beyond the Pale. I don't know if you know this expression. And beyond the Pale was an area outside Dublin, and outside that was unsafe to go.
Oh,
that was the wilds of Ireland, where the Irish savages and drunkards and all fighting
the
each other.
barbarians.
Yeah, and that was kind of the myth of that. So whenever they kind of lost that, I didn't think I was going to try and explain the whole of Northern Ireland.
Yeah,
but
it's very
the North,
valuable.
Why the North is different was the North had historically been more loyal to Britain, has really close links to Scotland. It's only less than 30 miles to Scotland, so a lot of people travelling back and forth. The language of the North, the accents, and are quite Scottish as well. And so in the 1600s, there was kind of like Presbyterians in particular who were causing stress to the then king. In order to get them out of his hair, were sent over, and they were given land, which obviously belonged to somebody before they were given. And so all the land and the wealth lay with the Protestant. So here you have the colonial thing setting up what was going to be an inevitable conflict already, because you're giving power to these people who took it from somebody else.
Yeah.
And
very similar to the US.
And you're building into your systems that inequality. So even then, back to the beginning of the Troubles, Fast forward to the 1970s. So the civil rights march in America were inspiring civil rights protests here because and one thing to look for was one man, one vote. It seems like a really obvious thing now.
Yeah.
I haven't got to one woman, one vote yet, but one man, one vote. Because if you own a property, you had a vote. If you own 7 properties, you had 7 votes.
Really? All the way to the 70s?
Yeah.
1970s,
So-
it was still landowners had the vote.
Yeah. Well, no. I'm saying it was shaped in terms of they had more votes.
Right, okay.
So everybody had a vote, but some people had extra votes.
Okay.
And also then, let's not build houses for the Catholic population because then they'll have more votes. So there was pressure. So people were combined into ratio, and that then led to families being split up and put into care, and which led then to angry young men who were ready for a fight whenever it came.
You had nothing to lose.
So, and a lot of people said the fight came to us.
Yeah.
So it wasn't very surprising when it kicked off.
I find it interesting that in both the Northern Irish situation and the Palestinian situation, the religious separation, you've got Catholics versus Protestants down there, you've got Jews versus Muslims, but it's so, in sort of the broader context, the religious aspect of it is almost secondary.
It's never been about theology. It's shorthand for describing what's basically an ethnic frontier or a cultural clash. And a kind of sense of identity. It's about identity, I think.
Because that's one thing that's lost in the Middle East is a lot of people are, and even on the news, like it's pushed like, oh, this is a Jew and Muslim thing. This is theological differences. That's what it is. And people go deep into it and they go back to Abraham and go through the whole story. And that's why they're fighting.
And the people look back in history to try and find a map that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of there's a idea that kind of, here Catholics and Protestants were living much more together before the Troubles, and now we've become more separated. And in Palestine, it was Palestinian Christians and Jews and Muslims living together, or maybe close to each other at least. And that's kind of being put under pressure by this kind of
the economic system
that's kind of, and by inequalities of wealth and resources and who controls the resources, and kind of that's part of it. I'm nervous to talk about Israel and Palestine because I don't really know very much about it, but I know there are lots of programs of commonality where when I worked more in peace building, there would be a lot of international conflict stuff with young people who would come from South Africa and from Israel and Palestine and would come to Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
I think the Northern conflict, I said it's quite, I don't want to minimize it, but in terms of other conflicts around the world, a number of people killed was over 3,000. But and for the size of the population, that means everybody knew somebody. But it happened kind of quite slowly. And so it was observable, and therefore some people were able to study, here's what happens in conflict. So this was, I think, the first conflict that actually had people going to universities and lecturing about conflict studies. And then we came up with an idea for this peace process that kind of hasn't quite worked, but it's a lot better than it was. It seems to be sort of working. Yeah. But we kind of fuzzed a few things. Yeah.
With the two areas of Belfast, you have the Catholic area and the Protestant area, or whatever way you want to talk about that, with the wall going down the middle. And those gates close at night still. Yeah. The gates close. And as far as who lives on what side of the wall, is there enforcement there, or is it just kind of...
No, it's purely by choice, but driven by fear. We visited I guess the most famous peace wall bits, but there's loads of really, really boring peace walls. And there's loads of interfaces that aren't walls. There are maybe just one street, and there's maybe a bit of wasteland, and then there's another street, and people wouldn't go over there. Or there's roads where kind of the Catholics walk on one side, the Protestants walk on the other. And they do that naturally without thinking about it. It's kind of, so when there's a new housing being built, they're going, well, let's make it a shared housing thing. Let's not make it a Catholic one or a Protestant one.
Sure.
If it's in the middle of a Protestant area, then Catholic families won't feel safe to go to it.
Yeah, they can call it mixed as much as
or Protestants won't want to go too close into an area that's not already a bit mixed or known for being a bit mixed. So where it's built is important because people want to feel safe. And then legally, you can't go, okay, we're thinking 50 Catholics and 50 Protestants because that's actually discriminating.
Yeah.
So you have to take the people who need the housing the most. So you get a random mix, which should theoretically be mixed. What we've tried to do historically is make those neutral spaces where there's no flags, nobody, there's an Irish flag, nobody puts a British flag out. But then nearly always something inevitably happens. There's tension close by in maybe a Protestant area, and they'll put up lots of flags in the area, and those flags will creep into this new shared housing thing. And then it becomes thought of, or people who then don't support those flags feel less comfortable there, and then maybe somebody who's there has power in the community, maybe from their history. So I'm talking in the community. So maybe someone has a paramilitary past and would still have kind of their voice would be listened to more in the community.
Yeah.
And they would go, my niece needs a house.
Right.
And so my niece needs a house. I'll have a word with that person and they'll maybe want to move out. And then my niece can move in.
Oh, so
there's loads of different processes. Some quite natural, all driven by fear. Some quite natural, but also kind of even so. So this is all happening within the working class areas we're going to talk about, but it's more mixed as a middle class area because there's less tension there because there's kind of like there's something going on about class that's kind of equally divisive here.
Right.
But I'm happy to go anywhere in Belfast. I have my piece of work and all friends and all that. But I've always chosen to live in a Protestant area. I live in East Belfast. It's majority Protestant.
Right.
And I can think of one friend who deliberately went and lived in a Catholic nationalist area. And as a prophetic gesture.
Right, yeah.
And
are they still living there?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And I have a lot of friends who kind of like, although they grew up in the Protestant kind of evangelical charismatic tradition even, they're sending their kids to a Catholic school. So the education system is divided as well. It's another whole story.
Oh, wow.
So
I didn't even know that.
So yeah, there's very few integrated schools, which are Catholics and Protestants together. There's the Catholic maintained schools, which are run by the church, that anyone who's a good Catholic will be encouraged to send their kids to, and they're also really good schools.
Yeah.
So because they're really good teachers, and then what's left are the state schools, who are then by default Protestant.
Interesting. Okay, so the Catholic schools are run. I mean, they must be connected to the Vatican. I mean, are they?
No, I think and now theoretically, and in the last 20 years, there's the same curriculum is being taught.
Okay.
But the teachers are trained separately. The Catholic. So if you are born here, you'll go to. I went to a Protestant primary school. I went to a secondary school, kind of the 11 to 17 thing. I had one Catholic in my class. That was kind of, and he was no one that was Catholic, and it was kind of like, he was interesting because of that.
Right.
But then if I wanted to be a teacher, I would go to the Protestant teaching college, and then I would go teach in the Protestant school.
Oh.
So there's like,
it's a weird kind of roundabout.
It's just, it's possible to kind of, the first time people actually mix is probably university. If you go to university.
Really? Don't go all the way.
Or in your workplace. But if you're working locally in your Protestant area or Catholic area, if you go and work in the local shop, you'll be working in the Catholic shop with the Catholic people,
right,
serving Catholic vegetables.
Catholic vegetables.
It's a default, isn't it? I'm going to get to the Palestinian and Israeli thing. Everything comes down to that big single question. So whenever the situation in the Middle East has been at times very tense, and often used for all the time. One of the times of tension, then people from the nationalist Catholic put up in solidarity Palestinian flags as is going on at the moment.
Yeah.
And across the other side of the wall, they, without thinking it through or knowing very much probably about the complicated geopolitical situation, put up an Israeli flag.
Yeah.
Mostly to piss off the Catholics. If you're going to support that, we're on the other side. So I think that's where there is a kind of few other things going. There's the lost tribe of Israel might actually be the Presbyterians. There's some Protestants who kind of like who see themselves as that lineage, and the people are going to heaven or that missing tribe, something like that's happening.
Yeah.
There's also then on the loyalist side who really like being British. They have links to then some very some right-wing British groups who came over to Belfast and went, and they would be quite right-wing, obviously, but also not a big fan of Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And they came over to their friends in Belfast and went, "What are you doing with the Israeli flag?"
Yeah.
And they, for them, it was an anathema.
Yeah.
And I imagine the conversation where they're going, we should annoy them, so that's good enough reason.
Really, just sort of like it's almost like a mirror, because on one hand you've got Israel sort of existing and continuing to exist because of the gifts of the West, basically, and the Protestant side of Northern Ireland sort of identifying with the crown, if that's the most specific way to say it. I don't know.
You want to be British.
Want to be British, right. So the situation kind of mirrors itself. You mentioned earlier the year 1916, which I find surprisingly close to the year 1917, which was the Balfour Proclamation, the first sort of document stating intentions to create a state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in 1916? Was that when?
So that was the Easter Rising. That's the kind of.
Is that when
out of Dublin when they declared Ireland as existing?
So
and
they did it
and within it didn't. I'm not a historian, so I don't actually know the thing. But then kind of and then shortly after that, they realised that Northern Ireland would not be part of that. And so 1921, Northern Ireland begins.
Yeah. So pretty much the split of the island of Ireland and the split of, at least the intention to split the section in the Middle East were pretty much happening at the exact same time.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of the coming out of World War I and that kind of...
I guess a lot of things were getting split up at that point.
Yeah, and the fear and awareness of what World War II might become.
It was also an opportunity for the winners of World War I to shape all of geopolitics in their favor. Mm-hmm. The war had just been won. They just had the opportunity and the authority and the political will and everything to sort of reshape borderlines almost across the entire world, but definitely Europe and the Middle East and Africa too, I think, at the same time.
Yeah.
What an interesting
And someone with a couple of people in a room with a ruler.
Yeah.
Straight line through whatever.
They did a great job with their ruler, making like the most conflict plus possible borders.
I'm just thinking that the first time I can remember, whenever I was waiting for it to fall down, either it's as a Catholic or a Protestant, and there was support on both sides, was Ukraine. So you see Ukraine flags on both sides, and that's never happened before.
You're talking about in recent times, and that's very interesting.
And it's kind of remains that. I think there's kind of.
Do you think it's an anti-Russia thing? Do you think it's a legitimate pro-Ukraine, or do you think it's a sort of social product of the internet and the messaging?
I have no idea. I think, but it certainly was remarkable because I was waiting for something
Russia flags to go up.
Yes, it wouldn't have surprised me.
Yeah,
because that's what That's really, and it wouldn't have been about Ukraine or Russia. It's about us, and it's about how we make everything about us. You know, it's some of it comes from empathy, and also, like when the new communities, so people that come here from other countries, for a long time nobody came here because there was a war on, more or less, and why would you escape violence to come somewhere where there was violence? Yeah. So we had very few people of colour, very few different religions, apart from Catholic Protestant. So we genuinely thought we weren't racist because nobody felt threatened by the few people who were here. Right. And now we've discovered we're really, really racist. I sense no surprise really to anybody, but it was we believed the myth for a little while. But what's interesting is if somebody comes from a country in Africa or whatever, and they move into a Protestant area, they'll kind of be counted as Protestants or kind of be counted as Catholics. And I did some work with some of the new communities, so kind of this is anecdotal, but from personal experience. And so if there's any racist attack, they would be, do you want to move to the other area? And they went, no, I don't want to go to the Catholic area. And they take on the fears of the little community. But there was another dynamic where there was some racist events and attacks that were increasing and making the news, and they were happening in Protestant loyalist areas. Yeah. So, like the flag thing, well, if they're going to be racist, we'll be not racist at all. So there was like a multicultural blooming in order to. It's positive silver lining thing to our sectarianism was that
driven by conflict.
Was let's make them look bad by being really welcome.
That is so interesting. And I think one thing that really surprises people still today is the continued paramilitary activity. You showed me a video yesterday of I'm going to get all the sides wrong, but
it was a loyalist paramilitary. It was a taxi driver who was working gathering a drug debt with a gun while he was taxiing. Yeah. But there's also kind of like yesterday on the news, there was a figure that an academic was giving a report in Parliament who said that there's more paramilitaries now than there were 30 years ago.
In the world?
Or in Northern Ireland.
In Northern Ireland.
So part of the peace dividends since our peace process, the number of paramilitaries has increased, even though they're mostly on ceasefire. Because it's moved to being drug gangs controlling communities through fear. Is all of that happening? Yeah, they're not doing as much violence. There's not as much of a threat on both sides. At the extreme sides of those, there are people who want to return to violence, and people who kind of think that it was wrong to give in before we got United Ireland, and that people over here are going, "We're losing everything if we don't stand and fight now. There'll be United Ireland, and our Northern Ireland will not exist." Yeah, and that's worth fighting for. Right. So there are people who, smallish numbers, but you can see how those things might develop momentum if they're not dealt with.
To the concept of walls for a second, of course, there's lots of questions about what exactly happened between Gaza and Israel and their walls. Their walls are sort of memorialized up here on your walls, but instead of, like the wall that came down in Germany, your guys' walls seem to be getting bigger. They keep getting taller.
Yeah. So I think I remember working with a women's group who kind of they actually met in a church that straddles the peace line. So they work, some of them come from the Catholic side, some from the Ross side, and they meet inside this church. They go through this wee green gate to get to, and they have the thing they have most in common is living beside this wall, and it overshadows literally all of their lives. And we ask, kind of going, "What do you want to do about the wall?" And they go, "We we would like it down, but not yet, not now. It makes us feel safe. And so I think the difference is some walls are imposed. These are there. They went up initially as barricades of protection. Initially, they were mattresses and planks of wood and built overnight and guarded by local guys who stood there to prevent people coming in and attacking them. So and then they became permanent, and then they became bricks, and then they became concrete, and then became, if it's going to work, it needs to be taller. But there is a parallel process of trying to imagine a world where they aren't needed, and so there's a softening of them. So sometimes that's by doing an art project on them. Sometimes it's kind of we don't need the barbed wire on the top, or maybe they can come down a tiny bit, maybe drop by a foot, or maybe each wall becomes a fence you can see through, so you can see the people living their lives over there. There's a possibility that you can't.
It's a good place to start. At least.
And there's been some art projects that go on. What if we just make them like plexiglass you can see through? What if they're just and there's other things that are gates that are closed. Maybe they don't get closed anymore, or maybe they only get closed less, or it's so there's different kind of ways of going. How do you make that happen? But also if you're in that community and you're trying to control a community, then the walls serve a purpose. So they're kind of there's a clear sense of protection as well. There's kind of this history of walls here is we have cities with walls that are kind of like Coleraine used to be a walled garrison city. It's a town up on the north coast, quite a nice market town now. But I was unaware until recently they had a wall and had a bell, and when the bell rang at night, all the Catholics had to leave the city.
Really?
So it was kind of like come in and work, but
that's a pretty.
So it's in our DNA. That kind of, and that's kind of like in the Derry was the walls of Derry, and the story there of kind of Protestants inside destroyed by a Catholic army, and then somebody offering to surrender, and his name is Lundy. And to call somebody a Lundy is just a complete traitor of the lowest thing. And every year there's a big statue or a big effigy of Lundy that's set on fire. And they march around the walls. So that happens every year. And I'm up in Londonderry, I should say. Also called Londonderry. Catholic Londonderry.
So I mean that's. So, do they still do the bell thing in the Catholics?
No.
I was going to say that's kind of the closest thing to what we see in Palestine and Israel. Is best case scenario, Gazans are given work permits, but they have to go back every night back there. Do you know? You don't happen to know the timing when they stopped doing that? Is that sort of an?
No, I think I've only just learned that. I think it's a very historical.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, it could be.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, it's not to give away the secrets here, but we are not trying to jump into the Israel-Gazan thing. That is not our intention. It just so happens that there's other places in at least similar situations or dealing with
I have ended up doing some training stuff with people around conflict, and conflict is the same everywhere, whether it's a couple of kids fighting in the playground or whether it's me and my wife or whether it's kind of family stuff. The kind of every conflict follows a pattern, and kind of if I fall out with you, it takes energy to be in that conflict. So eventually you go, let's do something. Let's have a coffee and we'll go. And that could be, I reckon we'd probably do a couple hours. but here we did 30 years.
Yeah.
And people go, these patterns, we exist, and we did some work over in Croatia with Bosnian and Serbian youth workers, and we did the same stuff, same storytelling, and how these conflicts tend to kind of blip, and every 30 years the stories are held, and even though we're living together, we still remember what happened. And so when it kicks off, we instinctively know because we've heard the stories of by the other. It's really interesting.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Johnny, for sitting down with Basil. And thank you to the listener who got through that. I had to really focus. I mean, this was an exercise in concentration, not just the audio quality, but the accent as well. But I think once you get the hang of it, I think you can figure out what Johnny was saying. So very deep, very profound.
It's very interesting. It's interesting. I mean, it's one thing to hear the story from me screaming it in the beginning of this episode, but it's another thing to hear it in the words of somebody who lived through it. You know, people, even sort of elder millennials in the city lived through some fairly significant bouts of violence in the city, and to hear the story told from someone who lived through it is really a privilege. And I would be interested in, if there was some sort of boots on the ground thing I could safely, or at least semi-safely do to explore more specifically the Palestinian-Israel conflict. I would take that opportunity. But until we can find a safe way for me to do that, I thought that this was kind of the next best thing. I think it's not only do I think Americans, but just us. I mean, the listeners of this show, I think it's valuable for us to think about the world in this way and to hear it from the people who experience it. That's very valuable. And we'll take what we can get until another opportunity presents itself. And so I hope you enjoyed it, folks. I love doing this. I think this type of boots on the ground stuff brings some value to this show that you can't necessarily get in any other way besides somebody going somewhere and doing it. We will improve my production strategies while I'm out in the field. But I really want to thank the producers of the Canary Cry-averse. It's very meaningful. People listening to the show, getting value from the show, and putting value back in, whether it's with their time, their talent, or their treasure. People, really, this is a podcast that's produced by people all over the world. And so I think it's only fair that we try to get stories from all over the world and look at the world through the perspectives of people in other countries. And in America, we so easily build a worldview and conspiracy theories and geopolitical opinions from the American perspective. But I had a lot of fun doing this. It wasn't necessarily easy, but thank you to the producers who are making it happen.
Yeah. One of the things we do, we thank producers on Canary Cry News Talk for coming in with their treasure, their talent, or their time. And specifically with the talent group, we often talk about how their art, whether it's music or drawings or whatever it is, helps us build the culture behind the community. And I resonated with Johnny talking about creating that culture of peace through artwork and through the other things he was doing. I think we can get on board with that. And also, I think one of the most important points that Johnny made there in that conversation, and probably the biggest takeaway for me anyway, was that conflict is the same everywhere. The context might be a little different. The names, the labels, the people might be a little different. But when it comes to the fundamentals of conflict, it's kind of the same everywhere. There are some patterns that emerge when you start looking at it like that. And it's easy to point at a direct enemy or, the Rothschilds as a perpetrator of this kind of thing. But our message has always been that we are in a spiritual war, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers. And they are the ones that are really deceiving and controlling man. And, it also proves the biblical idea of a fallen state, that we are in this sin nature. We're born into this sin nature, thanks to Adam and Eve there. And these conflicts all just prove that. It's just interesting how, everyone has ideas about how we can be better. But that doesn't happen unless everybody agrees that we are falling short of an ideal point or an ideal standard for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it's just a fascinating thing where these conflicts seem to prove the biblical worldview more than people realize. So hope you get something out of that, out of these ideas being, or at least us presenting it in a different way than what you probably get in most podcasts, which are, for good or for worse, taking sides on these issues and really going in hard on some hermeneutics that aren't always agreeable, but it happens.
No matter what your opinion about the conflict going on in the Middle East right now, and I want to recognize that listeners of this show probably have there's a greater chance that they have a more subtle and nuanced view of what's going on. And I hope that the way we presented this today goes to sort of strengthen that nuanced and subtle way of approaching the topic. It's so easy. Remember, the people who are sort of vehemently and passionately fighting the fight in the media and in their communities, or on the streets or outside the White House or wherever they are fighting their fight with righteous indignation. For us, I think it's always been a goal of ours to try to look at things in a way that those who control the narrative and those who have a vested interest in us taking sides don't realize that it doesn't matter which team wins, which team loses, the league always wins. And even just fostering this idea that we can look more broadly, we can use subtlety and nuance to try to understand conflicts in the world for ourselves, even if we never develop a cohesive political point, but just for our own souls and for our own peace and well-being. We hope that this presenting this stuff this way goes to just help the individual cope and understand what's really going on in the world. And again, that's only possible because of the producers of the show. So thank you very much. We're on the value for value model. You'll notice that there are no product placements. There's no advertising. We don't break into the episode with some pre-recorded advertisement for an underwear company or something. And that's not just because of taste, but it is also because on a broad view, gaining your trust and attention, and then us turning around and literally, not even metaphorically, literally selling your trust and attention to corporations in order to keep the show going is distasteful in our opinion. And participating in that sort of corporate mind control culture it goes against pretty much everything we stand for. And so instead, it's the value for value model. Not everybody is able to produce the show. We understand that. But the idea is if you get value out of what we do, you are invited to understand that the show can only continue when value gets put back in. And it's not just money. You can produce the show with your time, your talent, or your treasure. If you go to canarycry.support, that's a URL, canarycry.support, you can see lots of ways to produce the show with your finances. At the bottom of that page, you can also fill out your form if you want to volunteer your time to help out with the show. There are people all across the world who volunteer their time, put value back into the show, help us with projects and tasks, and whatever their skill is, they put that back into the show. And we call them producers because that's exactly what you guys are. When you put value into creating this show, you are a producer of the show. And if you're an artist or a musician or anything, you can go to canarycry.art. That's a URL, canarycry.art. And you can upload your art to the show there. Just create something for us. Be a part of the culture of Canary Cry Radio and Canary Cry News Talk. Upload that art there, and we'll be featuring it on future episodes.
Do you know what the Lambeg drum is?
No.
I was looking up what the most quintessential instrument for Ireland was, and I expected bagpipe or lute or something. But no, it's the Lambeg drum.
Huh.
Yeah,
you want drum.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of the Lambeg drum. It's a big drum that
sounds like a drum, all right.
Straps to your chest, and you got a stick on either side hitting it, and you walk down the street. It's like the early marching band type of thing, but they're ginormous. It's a huge drum.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Carnix?
No.
This is a really interesting. I don't know what this says about sort of the meta I don't know, internet culture right now, but there is clips going around of an old Celtic battle horn. It's an ancient Celtic battle horn. I sent you a link there if you want to check it out, Cons. Maybe we can play it. Maybe we can end the show with this ancient Celtic battle horn. I don't know. Maybe that's too profound, but yeah, it's this giant, very tall horn. You hold it straight up in the air, and it's got the head of a horse at the top of it. And you blow it.
That's a Viking shofar.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's and apparently the word on the street is that these were the battle horns of the Celts, and this was the last noise that a Roman soldier would have heard before. They're sitting at the campfire at night, and the Celts are preparing an ambush, and before the Celts attacked, they would hear this sound.
It's got different notes.
Yeah, it's got like harmonics going on. It's got multiple voices going on.
Ooh, we got the deep one. The brown noise.
Whoa, dude.
All right. Well, I'm scared.
So there's a Carnix.
Yeah.
As long as we're talking Irish instruments.
So
I guess this is the Celts. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, but there you go. We'll leave you on that, folks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. We hope you tune in next time. But until then, think outside the cage.